Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome once again to the United Regional Chambers update. We try and bring you some different subjects each week that we hope you find entertaining and helpful. This week, my guest is Mr. John Bates. John Bates is the job guy, and one of his taglines is he's the savior of miserably employed and seekers of work. Welcome, John. How are you today?
I'm awesome, Jack. How are you doing?
We're doing pretty good.
Excellent.
Thanks for
Good,
agreeing to come
good to
on.
virtually see you again.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it has.
Well, folks, one of the things John does is he helps an awful lot of people find jobs, refine their resume, clean it up, make it look good. We're just going to talk about a couple of subjects today, especially the craziness of this COVID-19. A lot of people working from home. A lot of people are now unemployed because, companies have closed. So a couple of questions that I have for you, John, is a lot of people may be thinking of changing careers about now. How would you advise them to define a new path?
Well, it's interesting that there's really two factors that indicate whether a career path is going to work for somebody. One of them certainly is the work itself, and that's the more obvious one. I mean, do I enjoy what I'm doing day in and day out? But I find more often than not, the reason people come to me is the miserably employed part of my tagline, where maybe the function isn't so much the problem, but there are factors outside of the function that make a job unpleasant. Probably the most common being poor management, but it could be things like work hours, economics, the organizational structure, lack of growth, money, benefits, things like that. So when we're charting a career path, it's most important that we first of all define what do we need to get from the career on all of those levels. And then when we're looking at the function, I always encourage people to think about it this way, that I don't look at my job as a career coach in helping people to determine what they're put on the planet to do, what's their purpose in life. I work with people to determine what are they qualified to do. Because my end game is not that we can pick a job, but a client could actually be in an interview and convince somebody that they're a compelling candidate. And when you look at it that way, it makes it a little bit more manageable because we have to have a responsibility to offer skills as a solution to whatever someone would hire us and pay us to do. So my starting point, and I would suggest that people can do this on their own, is to start by examining their successes, the skills that have gone into their successes, and then go look at the job market based on what kind of jobs leverage those successes, those skills, and then down select it based on how it matches the other part, the growth, the lifestyle, and all those factors. And once you do that, you're able to come up with a direction and also gauge that direction in terms of the amount of opportunity, because you don't want to create a new career path that's going to be a dead end.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, over the years, I've sent a couple of folks over to see John, and one of the things that it was resounding when they came and gave me a little bit of feedback is John goes over the different skills that you have, and he shows you how you can apply those skills in different careers, in different jobs that one of them said he never thought he would ever qualify for. John, how do you help people do that?
Well, it's a matter of isolating the skills from the job. And so what I do is I go back through with my clients and I work with them to identify the patterns of skills that they've used when they've been successful before, but also when they've enjoyed their work before. And by identifying the specific skills, I actually go out with them on, usually it's Indeed.com or LinkedIn or something, and look at real jobs. I mean, we're looking at jobs not by title, because titles are so wacky these days, but by looking at more the day-to-day activities and seeing what are the best matches of the activities that we've historically enjoyed doing and historically been good doing, where are those most prevalent in the job market? And then where there's the most abundance of jobs that also fit the other part, like we talked about before, the cultural part.
Do you find that some people are, I don't know if put off is the right word, with these titles? If somebody right now is the vice president of somewhere, and you're working with them, and the title that or the job that they're looking for doesn't hold the title of vice president, is that a barrier to some?
Well, sure. Yeah. Particularly nowadays this particularly applies when you're applying online. Because what happens when we apply online is, unfortunately, there's not a lot of interpersonal engagement going on when we apply through Indeed or LinkedIn or even through a company's own website. The vast majority of companies now use what's called applicant tracking software. And most of these use artificial intelligence, which makes it even worse. So the company will upload a job. The applicant's tracking software will broadcast the job wherever the company typically broadcasts it. And then as credentials come in, the software is comparing the content of the resumes to the content of the job posting. And the title certainly would be part of that. So if somebody was at a manager level and was aspiring to a VP, someone who's already a VP is going to have a huge advantage through the online process. And the converse would be true. If someone was a VP and they were looking to maybe go down a couple levels, they're going to be competing against people with those titles as well. There's a website called The Ladders that did a study a number of years ago. And it's kind of interesting that they equipped people that read resumes for a living with particular eyewear that allowed them to track eye movements when they're looking at resumes. And it was interesting that the people tend to fixate on what we'd probably expect to be the usual suspects, right? The former employer, title held, the dates of employment. They look at gaps, and at first blush, when they're first sorting resumes, they don't look a lot past that. So to your point, Jack, yes, the title is important, and to some extent, I oftentimes play with the title because I don't want to, out of hand, have a client dismissed because they maybe had a title that was higher than the title they may be looking at now.
Well, with a lot of folks being out of work, there's a lot of competition for these jobs today. What are some of the things job seekers can do to give themselves a leg up?
Well, it's important to know that there's really two ways to find jobs, and most people focus on only one of them. And unfortunately, the one that's least likely to pay off, which is the published job market. So all the things you see in the published job market, which would be really anytime you see a job and compete for it, that represents about 25% of how people get jobs, which is really a shocking statistic to a lot of people. But 3/4 of people get jobs by being what I call proactive. Now, being proactive means that we're creating the dynamic where we can be at the right place at the right time for a really awesome job. And that sounds really a little mysterious, but it's really very simple and it's really very basic. That there are two conditions that have to exist for us to get a job, which coincidentally are the same two conditions that we need to get a client, which is that someone has to have a need for something we provide, and they have to know we exist. Okay, so one strategy would have a mechanism where we're looking for indications that a company may need what we provide. The other part of it, of course, is populating our network with people who could potentially need that or hear of someone that needs that. So when that happens, those relationships are made. So when it comes to targeting, it's a smart idea, not just to wait till a job is posted, but to take a step back and say, okay, what are the kinds of things that a company might be experiencing that would represent an opportunity for me? And let's see if I can't create a mechanism to be known by the people who could know about that before the job is ever posted. So I'm already in the door. There's no competition yet. I don't have to deal with the computers and all that stuff. I just know the guy, right? And it's a lot easier than people think to be able to do that.
Yeah, as you and I in our business know, networking and opening up your sphere of influence is very, very important. Way before you start looking for a job, because you have to, like you just said, you have to know the right people to get into some of these different companies. Now, everyone in my network knows that I'm looking for work, as they would say. How do you remind them about them without being annoying?
Well, I mean, this is a real challenge, right? I mean, because most of the people that become my clients, they've already done this, right? They've already told everybody that they're looking for a job, and they're concerned that everybody in their network is just going to start tuning them out and ignoring them because they're being a pain in the butt. And one of the things that I want to point out to people is that effective networking doesn't begin with what we want to get out of the networking engagement. It really is much more about what we have to offer. And so if we go back to what we talked about a minute ago with the hidden job market and thinking about what could a potential company potentially hire us to fix, it's much more effective to talk about that than about the fact that I need a job, or in my case, hey, everybody, I need a client. It's really more effective for me to educate people about what my potential clients might be needing, so that if someone hears about it, the dynamic is no longer, let me help John Bates, the job guy, get a client. It's really more, oh, John Bates, the job guy, can help my wife or my brother or my best friends. I've got to introduce them. It puts the networker in a position of power, Jack, because I'm not going and I'm not beseeching people to help me. I'm really just educating people about who I can help and driving that dynamic to send me a much higher level referral.
Now, one of the things that we get a lot from job seekers right now, especially if they go, on the internet, which everybody has to these days. I get calls from recruiters, but they never call me back. Why is that?
This is a very common thing, right? And people are shocked to know that of all the jobs, only between 3 and 5%, depending on the survey you read, are filled through these headhunters. I mean, most people initially think, I'm going to go get me a headhunter. It's going to find me a job. Well, they don't do that. That's not who pays them. They make money from clients, from customers, from businesses. Nowadays, these businesses are very strict with headhunters. I mean, back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, recruiters or headhunters, they could freewheel. They could convince hiring managers to hire people they met and things like that. Nowadays, it's more like this. A company will call a headhunter and say, look, I'm going to pay you if you find a person that my HR team can't find without you. I'm going to pay you $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 to do it. Here's the 10 criteria I have for that person. The minute you present someone with 9 of those criteria, you can go find another client. And that's the way it is a lot of these times. And so these recruiters are pretty much a slave to these job postings. The other dynamic is that oftentimes these recruiting organizations are set up where there's really 2 sides in the operation. One side is the customer facing, which for them is the company, and the other side is the candidate facing person. So what you have is you have one division of the company getting job orders, and you have a completely different division generating inventory of candidates. So that division, if they get a cool job, a lot of their motivation for putting it out there isn't to find people for that job. It's to find people for their inventory at large that then they have to market to a company to be able to get something there. So if they can't make a commission from you in the next day or two, then you're really pretty much overhead to them. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means that you have to understand that's why it's a 3 to 5% hit rate activity.
Well, one of the things that that I want our audience to understand, and I'd like you to differentiate, John, you are not a headhunter.
I'm the unheadhunter. I used to call myself that.
Right, but you're not. You do get occasionally a job will come up that you'll toss out there to us on social media, whatever. But that is not your main function. Tell the audience what your main function is.
Well, there's 2 things that I do, really. We had talked about one a little bit earlier, which is to help people to define focus. One of the things that I think gives me a leg up on a lot of folks that do this, and certainly people that try to do it themselves, is that I look at jobs all day long. And so when I'm talking to a job seeker, it's a little easier for me to identify skills that have value. Because just because we want to do something doesn't mean someone's willing to pay for it. And so being able to help people to dig through and make sure that they're identifying the full set of skills, but also their full set of relevant skills is a big part of it. And the other thing is I'm objective. Job seekers are not normally objective, so I can be very honest with people about things that they have that they may love to do, but that don't fly. Right. And that's kind of my style to do that. Now, the other part of what I do is I help people to actually market themselves. So you had mentioned resume writing a little bit earlier. That's probably the most common things that people hire me to do, because writing a resume nowadays, we talked about keywords. So obviously content is important, but format too. A lot of people do things that that prevent computers from being able to import content from their resumes. Things like graphics and color and tables and page breaks and section breaks and using the wrong kind of word processing software. And a common fallacy is PDFs, right? I mean, PDFs are great if we're going to be exchanging a document, but if we're importing a PDF and the computer system is not designed to import the document, but designed to pull the content out of the document to put in a database, PDFs do not always import well. So there's a lot of people that are naively making that mistake. And so I work with people to develop resumes. I help them to execute career campaigns, determining, how to use LinkedIn, who should be in their network, what would you say to those people? If you're in an interview, how do you present yourself most effectively in an interview to hopefully get a leg up on the competition?
Well, I know you bring people back a little bit to reality. You did hurt my feelings the day you told me I couldn't be a runway model. But besides that, we've gotten past that now. How can people better prepare themselves for interviews, especially now where a lot of interviews are done via meetings like this, either Zoom or StreamYard or whatever it might be?
Well, it's interesting that with interviewing is, first of all, it's my favorite topic. And my background, before I became the job guy, for 7 years, I worked for a national company that does this career stuff. And one of my responsibilities was to do workshops on job interviews with the clients of that company, who are all heavy hitters. I mean, they were C-level, VP level guys, and not male guys in general. And these C-level folks, I always started these workshops by asking them, were they trained to interview? How do they approach interviews? Things like that. And I had 4,000 people go through that program, and it was amazing how few of these hiring managers are trained to interview people. I mean, most companies, they'll tell you what not to ask, like don't ask someone if they're married or if they have a car, right? But they don't normally teach people how to be able to pick talent. They spend more time telling them how to pick a cell phone than they do telling them how to pick an executive. And so there's a lot of dysfunction in it. The other thing that's kind of weird is that when you think about hiring cycles, the first thing that comes up in a hiring cycle is not a job posting. The first thing that comes up in a hiring cycle is a company need. So the company says, you know what, we want to invest X amount of money in an individual that can produce this type of value. So in a hidden job market, if we meet someone when they have that need, it can be very quick. When it becomes a published job, which is where interviews become more prevalent, there's a lot of steps that make it kind of strange, because the next step after I determine I need somebody is I go to HR. I say, okay, put a job posting together. So they put together what we all see on the internet, which is never why I'm looking to hire. It's always, here's what the background is of the person that I think can do what I need to hire someone for. So it's a completely different thing. And oftentimes when the interviews happen, they tend to focus on people's history. And many times they don't even get into what is the reason why this position is open and how do you measure success. And so what I coach my clients to do, and this is immensely powerful stuff, is to go into the interview with a plan, to go into the interview with an idea about knowing how you could potentially make a difference in terms of dollars and cents, I mean, measurable impact, and then direct the conversation into those areas, and then try to use a good dialogue or conversational tone to be able to get the hiring manager to talk about that. Because if we're able to do that and impart value about how we could have the impact that created the need to hire to begin with, we may be the only ones talking about that. And it's powerful stuff. And in the end, that's more often than not what people are looking for, a combination of that and fit, right? Now, when it comes to the virtual stuff, it makes it a little harder, but also makes it a little easier. I mean, because one of the things about a virtual or like a Zoom or what we're doing now is that, first of all, you can have notes. Okay. Now, fortunately, I know enough about what I've been talking about this a while, so I don't really need to refer to notes. But if you had to, you can refer to notes, which is a good thing. But there are some things that can go wrong as well. And so I advise everybody, if they have a virtual meeting, first of all, to prepare, as I suggested before, the messaging, just like we are. But it's very important to test your equipment. There are things like, we certainly don't want things that are distracting in the background. We don't want problems with the video or the audio. You want your camera angle to work in a way that you don't have it looking up underneath you and showing a double chin. You want to make sure you don't have a cat running across the background, or kids that are pulling on your pant leg or things like that. So setting up a dedicated environment where you've tested it to make sure your stuff works, and then organizing your thoughts, because we have to remember that we're looking at a camera. There's no person here. And so staying engaged with the camera without always looking down, it takes a little practice. And fortunately, you can do that on your own before the meeting.
Well, it's funny you say that with the expressions, because, we're all getting zoomed out, so to speak, because, we're on these Zoom meetings all the time. And some folks forget that they're on camera.
Yes.
I myself, I could never play poker because of the facial expressions and things that come out of this ugly mug. But other people need to pay attention to that. Now, another question I have for you, John, especially during these interview process, you mentioned that some of the interviewers are not real experienced in asking the right stuff. Well, what happens when they ask you one of those illegal questions now? How do you handle that?
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, and this is actually something very timely. I actually posted something about this morning, where companies, and this is crazy. I mean, companies are actually asking people about their kids. You have a family, and how do you handle your childcare during the day? And this is something that's just come up, of course, because of the coronavirus and remote things. And it puts a job seeker in a very difficult position, because they're completely within their right to say, you know what, that's an illegal question I'm not comfortable answering. I mean, it's not that's their right to do that. But the problem is, I think we can see what the outcome's going to be. Right. Is you're probably not going to get the job, right? And so as of late, and this is a very new development for me, as your timing of the question couldn't be better, is that I'm starting to coach my clients to put that out there on their own. Because most interviews begin in one of two ways. The interviewer either starts by saying, tell me about yourself, or they'll start by asking you a question about your background, like, what are you doing now? Why are you looking to leave your current position, or whatever? In either of those cases, I would want to accomplish a couple things. One is I want to use that question to talk about how I could fit or help the organization in the position I'm competing for. Okay, so I would do that pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever. Right. The difference now that I'm starting to suggest is to also put into it that I'm fortunate to be in a situation where I am able to provide this value undeterred throughout the entire day. I mean, there's nothing that is going to interfere with my ability to execute this job 100% at any time, any day. It needs to be done.
Okay, as far as some of the
whether it's true or not, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Give us your thoughts on seeking a job, say through LinkedIn or one of these, internet sites or whatever it might be.
Well, first thing you want to realize is that when we're applying for a job online, your candidacy normally is going to go through 3 steps. You're going to go through whatever you're interfacing with. So if you're going to LinkedIn, some LinkedIn postings allow you to apply through LinkedIn. Others may redirect you to the company, some other mechanism. Indeed will do the same thing. Some companies will post on Indeed. Some will redirect you to a different mechanism. But we need to recognize that in those cases, the resume is going to go through whatever the mechanism is, then probably through some sort of HR filter, and then at last it's going to get to the hiring manager. Each of those points of view values different aspects of the candidate. Computers nowadays, I mean, they're pretty literal, but they're also pretty smart. And what they're looking for is a match between the documents that they get, which is the resume, and whatever they've been programmed to look for, which is usually the job posting. So it's a literal match. Now, where artificial intelligence comes in is that having a keyword dump in a resume used to work, now not so much. So having a list at the bottom of all of your keywords or technical skills, a lot of these computer systems don't value that too much because they're looking for those skills in context. And so when you're building a resume, it's important within the professional experience, the work history, if there's keywords, which are usually usually responsibilities or tools like Excel, right? To have that stuff within the job history itself, in the work experience, so the computer can see that you've actually used it in the job. You just didn't read a book somewhere, right? Now, when it gets past the computer, it goes to HR. Now, no offense to HR people. I think they're some of the most wonderful people in the world, but their job is a gatekeeper. I mean, they are put on the planet to make sure that no one gets past them that the hiring manager doesn't want to meet. So it's very important that when we're writing a resume, that we use language that the HR people can recognize as matching what they're told to look for. Okay, which once again, in kind of a cool world, normally job postings are written by HR, right? So if we're using job postings to build the resume to begin with, chances are we're already building in the content that HR would recognize so that they can say, oh yeah, Jack Lank, he has these skills, right? So we can move him forward. When it gets past them, it goes to hiring managers. Now, hiring managers typically don't care about any of that stuff, okay? They don't care about keywords. They don't care about applicant tracking systems. They don't even usually care about that you can do the day-to-day stuff. Hiring managers typically want to know, how have you had impact? Have you improved revenue? Have you improved profit? Have you been recognized with award-winning performance? Have you been able to take on new responsibilities? Have you been able to adapt what you've done to a virtual work style? All these kinds of things, right? And so when I build resumes, what I suggest people do is format the resume in a way that separates out those accomplishments. And so what I do it is, when I'm building the work experience section, I'll have a paragraph underneath each job with the day-to-day stuff, which is really intended for the computer and HR. And then I will put bullets below that for the hiring manager, because we all know hiring managers like bullets, right? So that way they can focus on the bullet part and they don't have to go through the day-to-day stuff that's boring to them. But the HR person and the computer still get the benefit of seeing the stuff in the job posting, which is what they've been really, that's why we invest in those, right? Yeah.
Well, John, we're coming to the end of the show. You have been super helpful today. How can folks get a hold of you if they'd like your help?
Well, I have a website, www.job-guy.com, right there on the screen. So contact information's there. Obviously, I'd be quite the hypocrite if I didn't have a good presence on LinkedIn. So you can look me up there. You'll look me up at Facebook as well.
Awesome. Well, John Bates, the job guy, thank you very much for joining me on the show this week. I appreciate you taking the time. Folks, next week, we're going to have a new folk on. With the craziness going on with all the schools right now, Scott Abramson has started the Music Wagon. And the Music Wagon is for those kids that are in the music program. I'm an advocate of that because my kids went through the music program at Attleboro High School. But he will bring instruments to your house. He will come and pick up and deliver and fix your instruments if there's a problem. But he's going to be a great resource, and he's going to join us next Wednesday. Once again, John Bates, thank you very much for coming on the show today. And folks, thanks for showing up. We appreciate it. Hope everybody stays safe and stay social.
Hey.
Hey, that